Hello everyone, welcome to video number 1 by Punch Your Man Card, a video blog of sorts that's going to be devoted to all things art of suburban manliness. In this first installment, I'm looking at two electric lawnmowers, comparing them head to head. I was a little surprised that I couldn't find any reviews directly pitting the Ego LM2101 versus the Kobalt 80 volt Max, because these are the two flagship models being sold by Home Depot and Lowe's. Home Depot sells the Ego, Lowe's sells the Kobalt. So I thought it'd be good to actually compare these side by side and figure out which one is the better mower. Both have been getting very good reviews online. I would say the Ego in particular seems to be getting better reviews and was recently reviewed by a well-known consumer reporting magazine. Actually exceeded performance of a lot of gas mowers according to that magazine. But again, the Kobalt is also getting very good reviews. So before I get into the actual cutting tests that I've done, let's go over some of the specs here. First of all, I noticed right out the box that the Ego is sort of the Prius of lawnmowers, in that it was basically built from the wheels up to be an electric lawnmower. So there are some little features here that are nice, such as the one lever adjustment to basically swing the main handle up and down for storage, and then you simply pull these tabs to close the telescoping handle, and it closes up nice and neat. It also is all plastic construction. Although surprisingly, the Ego actually weighs a little bit more than the Kobalt, even though the Kobalt is a steel deck, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, coming over here to the Kobalt, this is much more like a Ford Fusion hybrid or something. Basically a hybrid or an electric motor that's been put on a more traditional lawnmower chassis. You have the steel deck, you have the more traditional mechanism for, you pull these tabs out in order to swing the lower handle closed, and you have to undo these in order to collapse it. So it's probably, I'd say, just a little bit more complicated to fold up the Kobalt than the Ego, although they're both pretty similar, and they collapse down to just about the same size. They both have single lever adjustment. Here's the adjustment here, there's the adjustment on the Kobalt. Both of them have 21-inch cutting decks. As I said, I weighed both of these, and even though the Kobalt is a steel deck, it actually weighed in at 58 pounds with its battery. The Ego weighed in at 62 pounds. I think the biggest difference in weight could actually be the batteries themselves. The Ego is a larger battery, and it's a little bit beefier. Both of these mowers are billed as having variable speed in terms of the motor and the mower blade. What I actually found is that perhaps the Ego does have variable speed, but if it does, I never noticed it. It always seemed to run at the same speed. The Kobalt, on the other hand, very clearly has a high speed and a low speed. It starts off in low speed, and when it engages more resistance from higher grass, it picks up into the higher speed, and then it kind of stays at that speed for about 5 to 10 seconds after you get out of the resistance, and then it ramps back down. A couple of smaller differences that I don't find as significant. The Ego has headlights, you can see there on the front. Those appear to be light activated because I didn't see an actual switch to turn them on. The Kobalt does not have headlights. I don't think that's very significant. I think that's a bit of a gimmick. The other thing that the Ego has, it has a power meter there on the back, so you can gauge in real time how much power your battery has left. Again, I don't find that terribly consistent. You're either going to run out of juice or you're not. Now, coming inside, I'd like to look at the batteries and the chargers, because here is where the differences start getting more significant. You've got the Ego charger and the battery on the left. You've got the Kobalt charger and its two batteries on the right. Now, the first difference you're going to notice, obviously, is that two batteries for the Kobalt. However, those batteries are shorter runtime. They're only 2 amp hours each, whereas the the Ego has a 5 amp hour battery. So you should get at least double the runtime with the Ego. The other difference is that Kobalt is an 80 volt design, whereas Ego is only 56 volts. Now, generally speaking, higher voltage means more power when it comes to power tools. That isn't always the case, because sometimes power tools can be designed to run more efficiently. They have better mechanics to them. But generally speaking, 80 volts should be stronger than 56 volts. We'll get into that more when we actually get into the cutting tests. One other difference, which we might as well discuss now, is price. With the Kobalt, you can get that, it lists at $449 at Lowe's, and with various promotions and coupons, you can get that for well under $400. With the Ego, it lists at $499. There aren't really any promotions to speak of. You could get a coupon that might get you down to $450. Bottom line is, you're going to pay at least $50 to $100 more for the Ego than you are for the Kobalt. And again, with the Kobalt, you're going to get the 2 batteries, which, while them only having less than half of the amps of the Ego battery, the batteries I found charge so quickly, they charge in about 20 minutes each, that you can basically continue to just swap them in and out with never having to wait. Whereas if you run out of charge on your one battery with the Ego, you're going to be waiting about 30 minutes for it to recharge. If you want to buy additional batteries, you can. Additional batteries are extremely expensive, $150 to $200 for batteries. With that, let's go outside and actually look how they performed in the grass. Okay, so as you can probably see, I've just mowed the lawn, and obviously I'm not going to take a video of mowing the entire lawn with these lawnmowers. I mowed a few test strips with the Ego, a few test strips with the Kobalt, and then I continued mowing the remainder of the lawn with the Ego just to see whether it could finish the entire lawn in one charge. I have about a 12,000 square foot lawn. I've had the Kobalt for an additional week, so I've already been able to test that, and I found that that took about 3 batteries worth, or 2 swaps, if you will, in order to finish the entire 12,000 square feet in taller grass. And I was able to squeak out a complete mow in just 2 batteries worth when the grass was a little bit shorter. First thing I want to do is just turn these on so you can hear the noise difference. There's almost no difference in the noise between the two at all. We'll start with the Kobalt. Both, you simply press the button first, then you pull back the lever. So that's the noise there. Here is the noise of the Ego. So even though the Ego is a little bit less powerful, which we'll get to in a moment, it's actually just a tiny bit noisier than the Kobalt. That could be that the more solid steel construction of the Kobalt does a little bit better job of muffling the sound versus the plastic on the Ego. Now, when I did this testing, I tried as hard as I could to get it as close as possible in terms of the cutting height. What that required was for me to set the Kobalt on setting number 5, and the Ego I put on setting number 4. So even though the Ego was on setting number 4, that actually resulted in the Ego still being a tiny bit higher in terms of the cut. Now what I'm going to do is walk up toward the testing ground, so to speak, and I'm pointing the camera here at all of the grass that was cut by the Ego. And I want you to see, possibly, maybe you can see as we're walking, there's a lot of stragglers, okay? It generally did a good job of mulching in most spots, but it also just, it kind of left here and there some stray strands, and that's not because of bad mowing technique. I mean, I'm overlapping significantly with each pass, but it does leave a lot of stragglers. You can see here, for example, I overlap that cut, but you still have areas that are poking up. We're going to walk on over here to where I have cones set up. This is where I actually mowed strips side by side with each mower to try to get the most comparable area. So what you're looking at here, in between these cones are the passes I did with the Kobalt mower. To the right of the cones are what I did with the Ego. And what you will notice is that, again, you might notice, if you can, the Ego is just a tiny bit higher, okay, in terms of the cut. I couldn't get the cut exactly the same height. But you'll also notice that the Ego seems to be leaving every now and then little patches of clippings that weren't fully mulched. Whereas the Kobalt, even though it was mowing slightly lower than the Ego, is not leaving any unmulched clippings. So it appears that the 80 volt Kobalt, that extra voltage does in fact make a difference when it comes to the power. The Kobalt does do just a slightly better job of mowing and mulching, and it also doesn't appear to really leave any stragglers. Whereas the Ego, you know, it's a very fine mower, it's well put together, and again, I was able to do basically the entire yard without even the battery going into the yellow, okay, which was impressive. It didn't seem to perform quite as well on the actual mowing, and that probably is a product of it only being 56 volts as opposed to 80 volts. Okay, finally, I'm just going to go ahead and plug these batteries in now that I'm done mowing, just so you can see what it's like for them to recharge. There's the Kobalt, the Ego that has started to charge. Again, everything with the Ego in terms of design is just a little bit more sophisticated, okay, in terms of appearance, and you get actual, percentage meters and things like that. The Kobalt is just, it's a little more basic, you know. It snaps in like so, and there goes the Kobalt. So, final thoughts. You know, it's tough to choose between these mowers in a lot of respects, okay? But I'm choosing the Kobalt for several reasons. First of all, it's less expensive, okay? Second, you get the 2 batteries, which is not necessary for most yards, okay? Most yards are gonna be fine with just the 1 battery. I mean, I have a 12,000 square foot yard, so the Ego should be sufficient for a great deal of homeowners. But if you ever do need to swap batteries, you've got 2 batteries with the Kobalt. So for 2 batteries for less money, that's significant. But probably the biggest difference, and really the deciding difference for me, is that the Kobalt is simply more powerful than the Ego. It's more powerful, and it does a better job of cutting as a result, and mulching. I did not do any bagging in this test because I don't bag, and you shouldn't either, so I don't find that significant. I guess the final thing that I'll note, which I failed to note before, is that as between the 2 models, the Kobalt does have slightly larger wheels both in the rear and the front. That's not a huge deal, but I do like larger wheels. I do find that they turn just slightly better, so that's another small advantage of the Kobalt versus the Ego. Well, so that's my review head-to-head. I find the Kobalt to be the slightly superior mower. Going forward, with battery technology getting better and less expensive, it's possible that in another year or 2, the Kobalt might be an even better deal, because you might be able to get a longer amp-hour battery and not even have to do the battery swaps. So that's my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave comments or questions in the comments section. Thank you.